All right, today we're tackling a really fascinating puzzle. How does one of the most powerful pillars of a democracy, the judiciary, just kind of lose its authority? I'm not talking about some big dramatic showdown. No, this is about power that fades away quietly, almost in plain sight. So, how does that even happen? Let's get into it. So, really, how does this happen? I mean, think about it. You have this institution, right? It's the guardian of the Constitution. How does its influence just shrink without a single obvious fight? It's a really subtle process. And to get our heads around it, we have to look at how power can shift when nobody's really watching. And one analysis puts it perfectly. It says that this kind of thing, this erosion of authority, it doesn't get announced at a press conference. It happens quietly. It happens in the procedural silence of the system. And that word quietly, that is the absolute key to this whole story. Which brings us to this really powerful metaphor, the idea of a fading shadow. Just picture it. The judiciary is this huge, tall building. It's still standing there, right? Looks exactly the same. But the shadow it casts, its real influence on everything around it, that shadow is getting shorter and shorter. The building is there, but its actual impact, well, that's what's shrinking. Okay, so what's making that shadow shrink? What's the main clue here? Well, believe it or not, the weapon in the story is something we all deal with every single day: time. Yep, the strategic use of delay. That becomes this incredibly powerful tool for shifting the balance of power. And this is a big deal because it completely reframes how we think about judicial power. We usually think, okay, the power is in the final decision, the verdict, right? But the argument here is that when that judgment is delivered is just as important, if not more so. A brilliant ruling that comes 5 years too late, it's basically just a history lesson at that point. Timing is what makes it matter. So let's look at how this plays out in the real world. On the one hand, you've got a really important constitutional challenge to a new government policy. It's a decisive question. But what happens if the court just waits? You fast forward a few years, and suddenly that policy isn't a question anymore. It's a settled fact. It's already been fully implemented. It's become the new normal. The debate in the courtroom might still be happening. But out here, the reality has already been set in stone. And that's the bottom line, isn't it? As the saying goes, time did the work. The government didn't actually need to win the legal argument. All they had to do was wait it out. Their inaction, well, it became a very powerful form of action. Time did all the heavy lifting for them. Okay, so if time is the weapon, what are the tools in the toolbox? What are the specific tactics used to create these delays? Let's open up this toolkit of silence and see exactly how it works. One of the key tools here has this really formal name: sealed cover jurisprudence. I know it sounds super technical, but the concept is actually very simple. It's when the government gives evidence to the court, but it's in a sealed envelope. And the crucial part? The person challenging the government, the other side in the case, they never get to see what's inside. And neither do we, the public. And you can probably see why this is so corrosive to a justice system. Normally, justice is adversarial, right? That means both sides see all the evidence and get to challenge it. But with sealed covers, everything becomes asymmetric. I mean, how can you possibly argue against evidence you're not allowed to see? The simple answer is, you can't. The whole process shifts from being about logic and reason to being about, well, just trusting the government. It's a massive change. Now, what's really telling is that these delays weren't random at all. There was a clear pattern here, a kind of selective urgency. You see, cases that the government considered a priority, they tended to move through the system pretty fast. But cases that dealt with fundamental rights, we're talking free speech, personal liberty, things like that, those were the ones that just seemed to sit there, sometimes for years. That pattern, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? Now, it's really important to get the nuance here. The argument isn't that the judiciary was captured in some kind of hostile takeover. It was something way more subtle. It's described as an accommodation under pressure. Essentially, the court seemed to be sidestepping major confrontations with a very powerful executive, maybe as a way to preserve their own institution. And another huge piece of this puzzle? Just good old-fashioned administrative friction. You get a bottleneck in judicial appointments. Maybe there's hesitation from the executive or disagreements over who should get the job. The result? You get these long-lasting vacancies on the bench. And that has a massive domino effect. Fewer judges means growing backlogs, and that makes it almost impossible to even get the big, major constitutional cases on the schedule. Suddenly, bureaucracy and paperwork are doing the work that a direct order never could. Okay, so we've talked about the methods, but what are the real-world consequences of all this? This is where we get to what's often called the chilling effect. the impacts this has on citizens and on civil society as a whole. And this really shows you what that chilling effect looks like. It used to be that taking the government to court was a go-to strategy for accountability. It was effective. But as the delays got longer and the outcomes got more and more uncertain, you can see its effectiveness just tanks. I mean, think about it. Why would you go through all the trouble of filing a case if you know a decision might not come for 5, maybe even 10 years? By then, the whole world has moved on. And that really sums up the core of it. The courts were still open. The doors were never locked. But their impact, their ability to act as a real check on power, that had narrowed, big time. The form of justice was still there, but the function, that was a different story. All right, so let's pull all these threads together. We've seen the tactics, we've seen the consequences. Now for the big reveal. What did this whole period of constitutional quiet really mean for the balance of power? And maybe the most incredible part of this whole story is that there was no drama, no big showdown between the branches of government, no emergency proclamations. If you were just looking at the surface, you'd think democracy was ticking along just fine. But underneath all that calm, a huge fundamental shift was happening. And this is it. This is the solution to the puzzle we started with. It turns out you don't need a loud decree to reshape a constitutional order. You can do it just as effectively with the quiet, everyday tools of delay, discretion, and, of course, silence. So that leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about. I mean, it's one thing if an institution is attacked and torn down, but what does it mean when it's just left standing, while its effectiveness quietly fades away? What does it really mean for a democracy when the shadow of justice itself, its reach, its relevance, starts to shorten right before our eyes?